Discussion on translanguage theory have emphasized the nature of dynamic and fluid nature of language. I'm Gurval Maciel and I'm talking to Professor Suresh Canagaraj, who is one of the main specialists into this area nowadays. Professor Suresh, let's start by the notion of language. How do you define language?
Right. That is a big question.
Yeah.
I think traditionally we thought of language as having a life of its own. Every label language like English, Chinese, Portuguese have a separate identity. But we are beginning to now realize that at the bottom of language, every language, there are only fluid resources. So I think Jan Lomart said it well once when he said we should start with the understanding of mobile resources rather than immobile languages. That is, there are words and also other semiotic resources that help us in communication, and they travel. You know, there are one set of words might be taken over in another community, and they might get appropriated in a different environment. So these words are flowing freely and they are changing all the time. But what makes them language is a social and historical process over a period of time when people start using a set of words consistently with indexicality that is fairly stable. Then people start attaching labels like, oh, this corpus of words constitutes Portuguese, or this corpus of words constitutes English. But if you look at it this way, then we are open to language always changing. The traditional way of assuming there is a structure of language is too static and also very hegemonic in the sense we can't change anything. So I do believe labeled languages get formed and they develop identities and indexicalities, but it's a bottom-up process. Words, as Lomart said, mobile semiotic resources get identified over time as languages.
And one of the things that you have addressed very much in your papers, for example, is the differentiation of the monolingual orientation and the translingual orientation. So what are these two, what is the main importance of these two concepts, for example, in language teaching and the concept of language in general?
Right. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm sure there are a lot of people who would think about the pedagogical implications in different ways. But the monolingual orientation made us assume that learning a language was normative. That each language has a grammar, and also that learning a language involves working within that particular language. You don't engage with other languages, maybe that's your first language or other languages that are part of your repertoire, because traditionally we said they interfere with your learning of a new language. But the translingual approach would say we cannot separate the languages that are part of our repertoire. The new language that we learn has implications for our old language and also for how we develop a competence for all the languages we have in our repertoire. So I guess teachers have to realize that the repertoires of a student need to be respected, developed, rather than suppressed. In the monolingual orientation, we sometimes try to keep away the languages they brought with them. And certainly for a translingual orientation, what this involves is one's ability to work with multiple languages. So a lot of research shows that multilinguals are not too worried about the norms of every language, but they are focused on the strategies of communication. So they ask themselves, how can I make myself intelligible to this other person? So what kind of resources can I use in practice? So for example, gestures, strategies like repetition, clarification, reformulation. So these kinds of strategies can be very helpful in translingual communication. So I'm proposing that teachers should focus not only on the form, the grammar and lexical items, they should also focus on strategies of interaction. How do we work with people from different languages in order to create intelligibility and comprehension?
And two main terms, some authors use the term translanguaging and use the term translingual practice.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you define the term translingual practice?
Yeah, I think all these words are getting closer to each other now, because when I wrote my 2013 book, I said translanguaging, as it was used by some scholars in bilingual education, was used in a cognitive way, that is about how people shuttle between languages in their cognitive competence. Alternative for Chomsky's idea of competence, along the lines of Vivian Cook, who formed the idea of multi-competence. And I said translingual practice, I'm putting a lot of emphasis on the social practices, what people accomplish in their communication. But as you know, Ophelia Garcia and Levy in their 2014 book say that's not fully true. They are also concerned about practices. So I don't think I would emphasize the difference, because I think we are all concerned about practices, and I'm also concerned about the implications for cognition, because the mind is real, except that I think of cognition as distributed. It's not just only in one place. But anyway, we're all kind of moving in a similar direction. But I was reading an article recently by on the plane while I was traveling here, and this person argued translingual practice is of course looking at practice in particular social situations, but translanguaging is going beyond words to include semiotic resources. But that's also not fully true, because I also think translingual practice is interested in going beyond semiotic resources also. So over time, we are all moving closer together to look at translingual practice as involving social situated interactions where multiple languages come together, with implications for cognition and cognitive processing as well.
One of the terms that is also addressed is the notion of code switching and code meshing and translanguaging. For example, you use some of your work the concept of code meshing, for example, and how does it oppose to the other term, for example, like code switching?
Right. So yeah, that is very real. I think there is some difference. So at least in terms of traditional understandings of code switching, traditionally what they said, if you look at some early books on bilingualism, multilingualism, I'm thinking of Suzanne Romain and others, they defined code switching as different from code mixing, where they said in code switching you require bilingual competence, because in code mixing or borrowing, the other word becomes part of your language, so you don't need bilingual competence. Secondly, they said in code switching, when you switch to another language, there is a rhetorical value that is added. That is, there's something different you are saying. You're not saying the same thing in two different languages. So when you switch, you are maybe drawing attention to something, or you are trying to give an emotional kind of weight to what you are saying. So there's a rhetorical contribution. Whereas in code mixing, if you use another word, like say in Portuguese, if you use the word computer, you're not saying anything special. It's just maybe another word. Or taxi, if you say taxi, you're not saying anything special. And that person doesn't have to know English in order to say taxi. So that was the traditional distinction. But what I find is, in a lot of cases, like Ben Rampton's example of crossing, you don't have bilingual competence, but there is rhetorical distinction. So for example, if I tell you, I talk in English, but I say, you help me on something, and I say, obrigado, Ugual, I don't know Portuguese, but I'm still saying something important because you see that I'm trying to be friends with you, or I'm trying to be accommodate your identity. So that's why I created code meshing, because there's something different about some of our languages, which is not always like code switching. But having said that, there are a lot of code switching scholars also who are agreeing now that you don't need bilingual competence, and there are a lot of different kinds of mixing. For example, styling. An Indian student in, London, he uses an Hindi word. Although it's part of his heritage, he might use it with an accent to give the impression that this is how Indians speak. So I don't know, we can call it code switching because that's his language, but there's something else going on, there's more going on. So that's why I like the word code meshing, to talk about alternation between languages, which don't always require bilingual competence. And a lot of people say, like Jan Domat says, we all have truncated competence. We have bits and pieces of words from many languages. Also, a lot of people talk about receptive multilingualism. We all understand more words, more languages than we can speak. So if that is true, there are all kinds of new machines that are taking place. But one clarification is, I might have indicated earlier that code switching is not part of translanguaging, but I'm beginning to feel that it can, translanguaging can be an umbrella term, and code switching can be part of that. It's one form. So for example, it might depend on the subjective perspective. So for example, if I switch to English while I'm speaking Tamil, and for me, these are two different semiotic systems, two different language systems. For me, it might be code switching, in the sense I think of these as two systems. So it's possible that in some cases, the particular switches might be so distinct for the person and for the other people, it might work like a code switching. So that therefore, I think it can be part of translanguaging. I also must refer to Jeff McSwan, who wrote an article recently that it's possible that he acknowledges that translanguaging, that we all have a continuum of repertoires, but at the same time he says it's possible that some languages are grouped separately in this continuum. Right. So I'm comfortable with that idea. I think it's possible that for some speakers, certain words might get identified with certain languages. But my only problem with him is he makes it look like all acts of speaking are a form of code switching. But I think there are some switches that go beyond the system, like truncated competence. There is no one system to put it into. And there are also some switches which work beyond the two systems to get a third meaning. So those things cannot be tied to one system or the other, maybe for a third space. So for example, I have a funny example. In Korea, they write 5 my God. And what it means is, in 5 in Korean is O. So it's oh my God, but at the same time, in order to understand that pun, you must not limit yourself either to English or to Korean. And also it works multimodally, because you have to voice the number O. You can't say 5, O, and then put together my God. So that for me looks like it's neither tied to Korean or English, but to a third space. So I agree a lot with Jeff McSwan that there might be certain languages grouped separately, but I also think it doesn't explain everything about translanguaging.
And another question would be, how does translanguage relate to language, ideology, and power in the present society?
Right. Yeah, I guess still monolingual ideologies are powerful in a lot of cases. If you look at Europe and America, there is a lot of reaction against diversity. and people are becoming very nationalistic, and also language is implicated. They think that native speakers own the land and foreigners can't speak the language as they would, or outsiders have to learn their language if they want to live there. So monolingualism is still dominant, but one of the problems is not to think only about monolingualism, because I think a lot of neoliberal organizations, business agencies, they are also promoting multilingualism. They feel that having a repertoire of languages is good for business. So it's looking as if translingualism is also becoming a fashionable language ideology for some circles. But I've published a couple of articles to show that translingualism, as we see, as a lot of critical scholars see it, with a transformative possibility, is different from the way some business companies and neoliberal kind of discourses are using translingualism, in the sense that they are using translingualism for profit-making purposes. They are not interested in translingualism as a ecological, holistic form of practice, because they are trying to use it, manipulate it for a particular purpose. But we are saying that translingualism is a kind of a resistant practice. That is, we use other languages also for the interests of our communities. We use it ethically for good outcomes for all of us. So I use the word reductive translingualism and expansive translingualism, because I want to say that some people are using translingualism for profit-making purposes and self-interest, and we should be careful not to fall into that ideology.
Right. And what is the impact of translanguage theory in applied linguistics and language education?
Yeah, well, as in all cases, I think there's a very slow beginning, in the sense that the dominant approaches need to be questioned. It takes a lot of effort to rethink a lot of old practices. So in some senses, there's still some resistance. There are a lot of teachers who are uncomfortable with it, or who are confused about it. More importantly, there are some people who don't want to change. So I was in a AAA conference 2 years back, and with Leeway and Maggie Hawkins and others, we had a panel on translanguaging. And one person, a senior American scholar, got up and said, okay, I see that you have a very interesting and important notion that you're developing, but how does this fit into my teaching? Right. If it doesn't fit into the teaching, I can't accept this. Yeah. So I had to just get up and say, you have to change your teaching. So because she was trying to keep the teaching and fit it into a teaching, and it doesn't work that way. And that was kind of bad news for her, because she doesn't want to change her teaching. She just wants to include it. So I guess it's going to be very slow, where people are going to rethink some of their current practices. But the good news is it's starting. I see more and more a lot of teachers who are thinking about it, who are trying to make spaces for translanguaging. But I don't think of it as very unusual, in the sense some people make it look like because it's difficult, it won't work. And what I think is everything starts like that. You have to rethink a lot of old practices, and you have to to imagine new possibilities. But after a while, it might become fairly common. So I'm waiting to see the developments.
Right. And what are the challenges, for example, faced by translanguage approaches and research?
Right. I think one of the things is to realize that we shouldn't boil down translanguaging into a convenient practice, like a method or a recipe for something. And in order to think that way, I think there are still a lot of theoretical developments happening, and one of them is, of course, post-humanism, new materialism, where we are thinking of communication as involving a lot of different semiotic resources, but also including the ecological environment and objects and things. So I think a lot of people now use the term spatial repertoires and earlier, that's an interesting development. Gumpers, a long time back, talked about the repertoires of a speech community. You didn't want to say that America or England has only one language.
Yeah.
There are different dialects, which is a good start. Then we went on to talk about people like Betsy Rhines talked about communicative repertoires, and that is it's not only words but also other resources, semiotic resources. And then Brigitte Bush and others talked about a personal repertoire.
Right.
The repertoire of the community doesn't have to be my repertoire, because what I need for my practice is something very specific.
Right.
Which is a good development. But finally now we are thinking of spatial repertoire in the sense that it's not only what I bring, but there are a lot of resources that are out there in that particular situation.
Yes.
So as a teacher or as a banker, there are things I need to work with. And I may not bring it there, but I can use it for my purpose. So that's just one example of a theoretical development. But what's going to happen is that's going to make research difficult, because we don't know what's our unit of analysis, but what should we focus on. Because to put it simply, we now say everything is connected to everything else.
Yes.
So where do we stop? So that's a new question. It's going to be there for some time. The way I resolve it is a simple one. I say it depends on the story you want to tell. What do you want to study? So depending on what you want to analyze, what's the story you want to tell, I would say I want to look at this, this, and this. In some cases, we might say there might be a critical moment in interaction which shows that we forgot something, and therefore we can include that. We can say, in order to understand this interaction, we need something, a missing piece, and which is not here, not now, maybe it happened many years ago. So that will help us bring those things into the picture. What's unit of analysis would be an important question. Also, what resource do we focus on would be an important question. That is, words or objects or things or visuals. That might also be depending on what the situation is all about, what kind of communication situation is all about. So there are a lot of new challenges coming up in our research. I think we should take the challenge, because we don't want easy research. It's always good to grapple with difficult questions. But it's hard to say how we might resolve all these questions.
And translanguage has to do with the political aspect, right? And it has to do with meaning making, and some authors call translanguage as a transgressive practice, for example. And I want to address the aspect of meaning making, because meaning making has been there for, in other theories, for example, multimodality. Since the communicative approach, we talked about meaning making. So, and how do you perceive meaning making in the translingual perspective?
Right.
And how different it is, for example, from these other approaches, or...
Right. So, it's kind of a big question. A couple of things to be said is, one of the things is meaning making is a social accomplishment. It's not about what I want to say. It's also how the other person negotiates it and takes it up. So I might use the word meaning making is becoming a distributed practice. It's not about me or the other person.
Right.
It's about something in between, how it emerges, which also makes meaning something. It's always fluid, in the sense we can't be sure and we can't be committed to one meaning. I can't say this is what I wanted to say, and if the other person didn't take it up that way, therefore it's a failure.
Right.
I would say a new possibility emerged, and that's a success, because we created something new. The other thing is we are also recognizing how material access shapes meaning, in the sense if we have only certain instruments, certain resources, it's going to shape the meaning in a particular way. This goes against, I think, the old idea of the individual as an agent. We can say anything we want. If we think about something, we can put it in words. But we are now beginning to realize there are constraints as well. The environment, we need to work with our environment. So there are a lot of things also to be said about making meaning across diversity, in the sense when other people don't share your language or don't share your norms.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things some rhetoric scholars have said is it requires a new ethics, in the sense of a willingness to collaborate with other people, a willingness to be tolerant and patient. Whereas earlier we said, unless the listener would say, unless the speaker makes himself clear, it's a communicative failure, and I'm not going to help them. I'm here to let you tell me what you want. But what we now find is that kind of, I usually call it a one-way street communication.
Right.
But if communication is to work and meaning is to be made across diversity, it has to be two-way communication, in the sense both people have to work together. So there's a lot to be said about ethics, but eventually we need to acknowledge that all these things might fail because of power, in the sense somebody doesn't want to negotiate, somebody doesn't want to collaborate with you, then that person's norms become dominant. But then I would say even that is a communicative success, in the sense that this is what that person wants, so I can't do anything about it. So it's not a communicative failure, but a different kind of communication where somebody refuses to collaborate with me. But it also brings to mind power, because sometimes we make it appear in translingual communication that this form of communication is very egalitarian, very democratic. But it doesn't have to be, because there are, ideally translingual communication, in order to be successful and for meaning to be made, would require a particular ethics and or a particular politics, which is transgressive. But the ideal situation doesn't exist all the time. So in real life, there are situations of power where somebody wants to impose their meaning. So that's where we need to, I'm an optimist. I feel we can renegotiate, we should try to renegotiate, we should try to re-educate the community, but it'll take some time.
And just to a final aspect, about some authors use the concept of assemblage, for example, and other authors call the concern to study the language, using other, for instance, sensorial meaning-making process, for example. So how do you see the new directions into these studies? For example, just mentioned Kennycook uses the concept of assemblage, and are they using other ways of representing, of representation? So what is the future directions?
It's good and bad. It's certain things are promising, but there are also new questions being asked. So some of the good things are we are developing a more inclusive orientation of communication, rather than looking at only words or individuals. We are saying that we have to look at communication.
For example, the aspect of feeling, how can we represent these aspects, for example? Right.
So that's also there. That's right. I guess that goes also back to your question about meaning. What is meaning? And earlier we used, but now we find there are a lot of meanings you can put in words. You can't put in words. Things that are affective, things related to perception. So along those lines, there is a non-representational theory, but we've been focused so much on facts, knowledge, truths, but not about processes, strategies, feelings, affect. They are also important in life, but we usually give them second place, not an important place. So that's becoming part of meaning. They are also meaning. So that will be addressed. Embodiment would be another thing, not to separate meaning from our bodies and our physical life, social life. Space, exactly. So space would also come in with an ecological orientation to look at how time and space shapes language. I think earlier we reduced it to here and now for meaning making. Now we find that meaning making is not necessarily here and now. It includes layers of other times and places. But in terms of assemblage, the new question, so it's good that we're expanding it, because we are getting a richer understanding of meaning, a richer understanding of communication. But the new questions that are coming out is people are asking if we, say one of the things also that's happening is we are questioning the role of the individual. We are saying there's no individual. The individual is made up of social networks and material networks. But then the problem now is, if somebody does evil, somebody shoots up 50 people, can we blame one person? Or is that person going to say, there's no person here, I'm made up of so many. So a lot of people saying, now we need to account for ethics, morality, politics, political agency. We need to blame somebody, but we can't. If we go in this direction, we are going to say nobody is to blame. So we need to bring those questions back in. So I also think those are natural processes. Sometimes we expand the way of looking at it, and then we need to kind of reinterpret some of our traditional assumptions. So there are a lot of people who are now trying to account for human agency. That despite all this, maybe people are still responsible for something. The way I look at it is, I think that I borrowed this from Arjuna Padare. He says, we don't have agency, but we may be medians. That is, we mediate a lot of things, and we mediate it differently.
Right.
Like you, as an ethical person, will mediate all these resources one way, and somebody who is unethical is going to mediate it in a different way with different outcomes.
Yeah.
So that might be a good starting point to say we are shaped by so many things, but that doesn't mean there's only one way in which we act. We all engage, or another word I sometimes use is positioning. Like with all these resources, I position myself one way, another person will position themselves in another way, and that for me is a sign of also agency. That is, you're doing something to deal with all these resources in a particular ethical way or not. So those questions we are going to wrestle with, I think, over time. And it's kind of a work that has to be done as we go forward.
Well, that was a very good conversation. So thank you very much for your time, and hope to have another kind of conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Enjoyed talking.